A toddler was found sitting alone in the middle of a dirt road near a wildlife reserve, tears streaming down his face. But what froze the rangers in place was what surrounded him, a circle of full-grown lions. No one dared to move. What happened next would shock even the most seasoned experts and change everything they thought they knew about wild predators. The sun had just begun to rise over the wide expanse of the Hluhluwe Imfolozi Game Reserve in South Africa, casting a golden glow across the dry savanna. It was the kind of morning that made everything feel untouched, ancient, and dangerously alive. Park Ranger Sipho Mthembu adjusted his binoculars, sipping his coffee as he prepared for the first patrol of the day. His radio crackled, a routine check-in from a colleague deeper into the territory. But something in the background caught Sipho's attention, a distant, rhythmic cry, faint but unmistakably human. He stood up straight, heart skipping. No one should be on foot this deep into the reserve, especially not a child. Within minutes, Sipho and two other rangers were speeding down a narrow dirt road in their open-top Land Cruiser. As they rounded a bend near a cluster of acacia trees, the vehicle came to a hard stop. What they saw defied logic. A small boy, no older than 2 or 3, sat sobbing in the dust. His face was streaked with tears and dirt. He was barefoot, dressed in a worn blue shirt and shorts, his tiny hands covering his face. But it wasn't just the child that made the rangers freeze. Surrounding him, forming a loose, silent circle, were 5 adult lions. Massive, still, watching. None of them moved. It was as if time itself had halted. Sipho slowly reached for his radio, whispering to alert Central Base, but he couldn't take his eyes off the scene. The lions weren't growling, they weren't even posturing. One of them, a large lioness with a scar across her muzzle, sat closest to the child, her ears flicking slightly, but her gaze locked on the boy. Her tail flicked once, twice. The rangers didn't dare get out of the vehicle. Any sudden movement could trigger a response, especially from lions that felt threatened or protective. But what Sipho couldn't understand was why the lions hadn't already acted. Why hadn't they attacked or walked away? Instead, they remained there, unmoving, almost waiting. Something strange was happening, something that Sipho had never seen in all his years in the bush, and he had the distinct feeling that what they were about to witness would stay with them forever. Sipho kept his binoculars locked on the boy, trying to process the surreal scene. The lions didn't seem aggressive, but their presence alone was a deadly threat. Lions are unpredictable, especially in the early morning when they're still active from nighttime hunting. And yet, this pride was doing something no textbook had ever described. They weren't acting like predators. They were behaving almost like sentinels. The boy continued to cry softly, now slumped forward as if exhausted. His back was hunched, and one of his small legs trembled. Sipho's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Every instinct in him screamed to rush in, grab the child, and drive away. But he knew better. Any sudden movement might turn this eerie calm into chaos. He leaned toward the ranger sitting beside him. "We need to call for veterinary backup, now," he whispered. "And bring tranquilizers, just in case." "Already done," the ranger replied. "They're 10 minutes out, maybe less." Sipho exhaled, watching the lioness closest to the child. She blinked slowly, her breathing calm, her posture relaxed. There was no growling, no baring of teeth. Her massive paws rested side by side in the dirt, and her tail curled lightly over her hind legs. But what was she doing there? Then something happened that made Sipho's breath hitch. The lioness took one slow step forward. The other lions didn't move. They simply turned their heads slightly, following her motion. The rangers tensed. Sipho gritted his teeth. He was about to yell, instinct taking over, when the lioness stopped, just inches from the child. She lowered her head, not in a pounce, but in a strange, careful gesture. She sniffed him. The boy looked up, and for a brief moment, he stopped crying. The lioness blinked again. Then, in a move that made the entire ranger team stare in disbelief, she sat down beside him, her body angled slightly outward, as if guarding. "What in God's name is going on?" muttered one of the younger rangers. Sipho didn't answer. His mind was racing, flipping through years of knowledge, stories, myths, even legends. He had heard tales of lions sparing people, rare cases, usually dismissed as anomalies, exaggerations, but this wasn't a story. This was happening right in front of him. Another lion, a male with a heavy mane and a slow, deliberate gait, approached the scene. His muscles rippled beneath his golden fur. Sifo felt his pulse rise. Males were usually more unpredictable. The risk just multiplied. But to everyone's shock, the male didn't move toward the child. Instead, he sniffed the air, then turned to the lioness and the boy. He looked down at them both, then, astonishingly, lay down on the opposite side of the child, mirroring the lioness, as if they were forming a living shield. The little boy was now sitting between two lions. "What are we looking at?" Sifo murmured to himself. By now, a fourth lion had joined, a younger female, lanky and curious. She approached slowly, then circled the group at a distance. She didn't seem interested in the child, more like she was watching the others for cues. After a slow circle, she sat down too. A semicircle was forming around the boy, not a trap, a barrier. The sound of an engine snapped Sifo from his trance. The veterinary unit's vehicle was approaching, carefully navigating the dirt path behind the ranger's truck. Dr. Elsabe Kwitse, a seasoned wildlife vet with 2 decades of experience, stepped out slowly. She crouched beside Sifo, her eyes widening as she spotted the boy. "Oh my God," she whispered. "They're guarding him." "That's what it looks like," Sifo muttered. "But why?" Dr. Kotse shook her head. "I don't know. Maybe they smell something on him. Maybe they recognize something, a scent, a sound. There's so much we still don't understand." Sifo felt a chill crawl down his back. The lions hadn't harmed the boy. They hadn't even scared him anymore. His crying had faded to quiet sniffles, and he now sat very still, nestled between the 2 lions. He looked oddly calm, but no one could figure out how he got there. No adult was in sight, no tracks from a vehicle nearby, and this wasn't a place a toddler could wander into by accident. The area was fenced on all sides and located miles from the nearest village. Something was very wrong. Dr. Kutse began prepping a tranquilizer dart. "If we sedate the closest lions," she said carefully, "we can buy a few minutes to grab the child, but we only get 1 shot at this. If they sense we're trying to take him—" "I know," Sifo said. He raised the radio again. "Central. We have a live child surrounded by lions. Repeat. Child is alive. No signs of aggression. We're attempting a tranquilized extraction. Prepare for medical evac in 10 minutes. The reply crackled in, "Understood." "Good luck." Sifo stepped back from the Land Cruiser and turned to Dr. Kotse, but just then, the lioness beside the boy did something no one could have expected. She stood up and nudged the child gently with her nose, as if trying to make him stand. The lioness's nudge was gentle, almost maternal. Her large head lowered again, and she gave the boy's shoulder a light push with her snout. The child flinched slightly, confused, then looked up at her face. For a long second, they simply stared at each other, beast and child, separated by a gulf of nature and instinct, yet eerily calm. The boy didn't scream. He didn't crawl away. He blinked and wiped his nose with the back of his hand. "She's trying to wake him up," Dr. Kotse whispered, "like a lioness with a cub." Sifo nodded slowly, still not fully believing what he was seeing. The male lion remained lying down, but shifted his massive paw just slightly forward. Protective, not aggressive. The other lions remained motionless. The entire pride seemed to be participating in some ancient ritual no human could understand. "I've never seen this before," Sifo said. "Not in 20 years of field work." Dr. Kotse held her dart gun ready, but hesitated. "If we sedate her now," she murmured, "the boy could get startled and run. If he trips or makes a sound, we can't predict how the others will react." "We wait," Sifo said. "Just for a moment." The child, sensing the lioness's persistence, slowly began to move. He turned his body and attempted to stand, legs wobbly. His balance failed at first, and he fell forward, landing softly on his hands. The lioness didn't flinch. She waited. Then, as he pushed himself up again, She took a step back to give him space. Sipho's heart pounded louder than ever. He's trying to stand on his own. One of the rangers behind Sipho muttered a quiet prayer. The boy finally managed to get on his feet, swaying slightly. He was barefoot, his knees scraped, and his clothes hung off him like he'd been lost for days. But the look on his face wasn't one of panic anymore. It was dazed calm. He turned slowly in a circle, looking at the lions around him, and still, none of them moved. The lioness gave a low grunt. Not a growl, not a warning, just a sound. The child turned to her again. He seemed to recognize it. Then, slowly, he took one hesitant step toward the edge of the circle. No one could believe what was happening. Dr. Kurtze lowered her dart gun. "If he walks out of that circle," she murmured, "I'm not firing at anything. We let him come." But the question remained. Where had he come from? Sipho scanned the surrounding bushland again. No broken fences, no shoe prints, nothing but lion tracks and vehicle tire marks from their own jeeps. It was as if the boy had just appeared. The child stepped forward again. The lions parted. They made space for him, like guardians allowing safe passage. "Start filming," Sipho said to the ranger behind him. "Now, document everything." The boy now stood a few feet from the edge of the circle. The lioness walked beside him, matching his pace but not blocking his path. She stayed close enough that her side brushed his shoulder, steadying him. Then, without warning, the child looked up at the ranger vehicles, his eyes locked onto Sipho's, and he began to walk toward him. Sipho froze, his boots rooted to the ground, his breath shallow. The child's steps were slow but deliberate, his gaze fixed, as if he somehow knew this was the direction he had to go. The lioness paused, then stopped. She did not follow. Instead, she turned her head, gave one last glance to the boy, and walked back to her pride. The circle reformed without a sound, and the lions simply sat down again. Dr. Kurtze stood in stunned silence. "That's impossible." "No," Sipho said softly. "It just happened." The boy stumbled forward, finally collapsing just a few steps from Sipho. The ranger rushed forward, kneeling, scooping the child into his arms. "Got him," he called out. "He's alive." Breathing shallow, weak, but stable. The child clung weakly to Sipho's chest. His tiny fingers grasped at the ranger's shirt like he didn't want to let go. Dr. Kurtze ran over with a blanket and wrapped it around the child's shoulders. She checked his pulse, his breathing, his temperature, all low but not critical. "I don't see any bites," she said. "No scratches, no bruising. It's like they never touched him." Sipho looked toward the pride again. They hadn't left. They remained in the exact same formation, watching, waiting, silent. "We need to get this boy to the clinic," Kurtze said urgently. "He's severely dehydrated. Might be hypoglycemic too. If he'd spent one more hour out here." But Sipho wasn't listening anymore, because something about the boy's face was starting to bother him. He'd seen those eyes before, somewhere, but where? Then, like a bolt of lightning, it hit him, and what he remembered made his blood run cold. Sipho tightened his grip on the child, feeling the weight of the boy's frail body against his chest. The warmth was faint, but it was there. The child was alive. But it wasn't just the miracle of his survival that left the ranger shaken. It was his face, his eyes. There was something hauntingly familiar in them. And then, with a sudden wave of dread, Sipho remembered exactly where he had seen those eyes before. 2 years earlier, a young woman named Naledi had worked briefly as a conservation intern at the reserve. She was quiet, brilliant with animals, and often wandered too close to the lions' sectors, especially the pride that now surrounded them. Sipho had warned her several times to keep her distance, but she'd always insisted they posed no threat to her. She claimed they knew her, especially the lioness with the scarred muzzle. Her name was Ayanda. Naledi had a strange bond with Ayanda. In fact, she'd been present when the lioness had been rescued as a cub, brought in with a broken leg and cared for at the reserve clinic. The bond had formed then, human and lioness. Sipho had watched them through the years. Even after Ayanda was reintroduced into the wild, Naledi would stand at the edge of the fence, and the lioness would approach. Not aggressively, quietly, as if remembering. Then, one day, Naledi vanished. She'd submitted her resignation by email, saying she was returning to her rural hometown, but her number was disconnected and she never collected her final paycheck. Saifo and others tried to follow up, but the trail went cold. He eventually assumed she'd gone to another region or simply wanted to disappear. Until now. Looking down at the child, Saifo saw it clearly. The shape of the boy's nose, the curve of his brow, his skin tone. Even the eyes, dark, soft, wide with wonder. It was Naledi's child. There was no doubt in his mind, but that revelation raised more questions than answers. Where was Naledi now? Had she brought him here? Why leave him in the middle of the road? And how could the lions, Ayanda's pride, have known who he was? Saifo turned to Dr. Ketsi. I know who this child belongs to. Ketsi's eyes widened. You do? Yes. His mother worked here 2 years ago. Her name was Naledi. She was close to this pride, especially the lioness with the scar, Ayanda. Dr. Ketsi stared at the lions, stunned. That explains the behavior, at least partly. They recognized something in him. A scent, maybe, or something more primal. Saifo nodded, mind spinning. If Naledi brought him here, maybe she trusted the lions more than anyone else. But why wouldn't she come herself? Ketsi asked, voice tight. Why would she leave her child alone like this? That's when a voice crackled through the radio. Unit 3 to command. We've just located a vehicle crashed in a ravine northwest of the lion sector. Female driver inside. She's alive but unconscious. No sign of passengers. Requesting medical evac now. Saifo's heart dropped. He grabbed the radio. This is Saifo from Unit 1. Confirm. Did you say female driver? Affirmative. Mid-20s. Light frame. African. Injuries suggest impact trauma. Looks like she veered off the track last night. Any ID? Saifo asked. Found a lanyard in the car. Wildlife Reserve badge. Name? Naledi Kumalo. Saifo's legs nearly gave out. He knelt down beside the boy, gently brushing a curl from the child's forehead. She tried to reach us, he whispered, but the crash. She must have been trying to leave him near the ranger's route, Koitse said, her voice catching. She probably believed the lions would protect him until help came. And they did. Somehow they did. The lions hadn't just tolerated the boy, they'd defended him, watched over him, formed a barrier around him as if he were one of their own. It defies everything we know, Koitse said. Every instinct, every scientific explanation. Maybe not, Saifo replied quietly. Maybe it confirms something deeper. That these animals, especially ones raised in close contact, remember, feel, respond to connection. As the rangers prepared to evacuate the child, Saifo gave one last glance toward Ayanda. The lioness sat at the edge of the group, eyes fixed on him and the boy. No aggression, no fear, just stillness, presence. Then, slowly, she turned her head toward the ravine in the distance, almost like she knew, almost like she was waiting. Saifo's breath caught in his throat, because at that very moment, the voice on the radio came back. Command, this is Unit 3. The woman's regaining consciousness. She's asking about her son. The boy had fallen asleep in Saifo's arms, his tiny body wrapped in the ranger's jacket. Dr. Ketsi checked his vitals once more, confirming he was stable, just exhausted and dehydrated. The vet truck was already warming up to head back toward the field station, where medics were preparing to receive him. But as the vehicle rolled slowly toward the tree line, Saifo stayed behind. He couldn't take his eyes off Ayanda. The lioness hadn't moved. Neither had the rest of her pride. They remained in that silent formation, a circle now broken but still intact. Their amber eyes followed the boy until the truck disappeared beyond the acacia shrubs. Then, one by one, they stood, not in alarm, not in fear, in solemn, deliberate motion. And then, without a single sound, they turned and vanished into the bush. It was as if their task had ended. Saifo exhaled slowly. It wasn't just remarkable, it was humbling. By the time he and the remaining rangers returned to the station, the sun was high and the facility was buzzing with energy. The boy was already being tended to by medics, and a transport team had just brought Naledi into the clinic. She was semi-conscious, bruised, but alert enough to keep whispering the same word. Luazi. It was the boy's name. The moment Sifo entered the room, her eyes widened. Her voice cracked from dryness. Did they find him? Sifo stepped forward and nodded. He's safe. You left him near Ayanda's territory, didn't you? Naledi's expression crumbled. A tear slid down her cheek. I didn't know what else to do. Her voice was barely audible, but filled with a grief that went deeper than physical pain. I was driving all night, trying to get here, but the brakes failed. I crashed. I thought I was going to die, Sifo, and I didn't want him alone in the world. I thought, if I left him where Ayanda might find him, she would protect him. She did, Sifo said, his voice hoarse. They all did. Naledi let out a broken laugh, part relief, part disbelief. You always told me I was too close to the lions, she whispered. Maybe I was, but I felt it. I felt something. Ayanda was more than just a wild animal. Sifo knelt beside her bed. You were right. Naledi closed her eyes. Please, let me see him. He's sleeping, Sifo said, but he's safe. And as soon as he wakes up, we'll bring him here. Outside the clinic, Dr. Koetse reviewed footage from the ranger's body camera. The video clearly showed everything. The lions surrounding the boy, their stillness, their lack of aggression. The lioness nudging the child, the protective circle. It was all there. I'm going to submit this, she said to Sifo. It's unprecedented. Do what you need to do, Sifo replied. But be careful with the story. Koetse looked up. You're afraid people won't believe it? No, Sifo said. I'm afraid they will. And then come looking for it, looking for a spectacle. Koetse nodded, understanding instantly. They'll romanticize it. Or worse, try to replicate it. Bring children into the bush. Expect the same result, not realizing how delicate, how rare, how specific this bond was. Koetse sighed. We'll keep the location vague, just enough to let the story speak for itself. That evening, as the sky turned a soft purple and the bushveld quieted, Luazi awoke in the station's infirmary. The boy blinked up at the ceiling, confused but calm. A nurse offered him water, which he drank eagerly. He didn't cry, he didn't speak. But when Sifo entered the room, he reached out for him instinctively. Sifo lifted him gently and carried him to Naledi's room. Mother and child locked eyes. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Luazi stretched out his little hand and touched her cheek. Naledi broke into quiet sobs, clutching him to her chest with all the strength her battered body could muster. Sifo stepped back and closed the door, giving them privacy. He stood in the hallway, overwhelmed, not just by the miracle that had unfolded, but by the weight of what could have gone wrong. He turned to Koetse. There's still something I don't understand. What is it? She asked. Why did Ayanda react the way she did? Is it just memory? Recognition of Naledi's scent on the child, or something more? Koetse hesitated. I don't know. Science can't measure bonds like that. But sometimes, Sifo, I think animals feel more than we're willing to admit. Sifo nodded. But something still gnawed at the back of his mind, because when he'd carried Luazi earlier, the boy had mumbled a word, a strange word, and Sifo was just now realizing what it meant. The word had been whispered only once, barely audible. As Sifo carried Luazi across the reserve station, the boy, still half asleep, had murmured something strange. Injabulo. It lingered in Sifo's mind all night. It wasn't a word the child could have learned by chance. Injabulo was Zulu for joy, but it wasn't commonly used in everyday speech, not by someone so young, and certainly not out here. More puzzling was the way the boy had said it, like a name. Sifo couldn't shake the feeling that it meant something deeper. The next morning, after checking on Naledi and her son, both recovering well, he visited the reserve archives. The station kept detailed records on every lion, including their health, movements, and any human contact over the years. Sifo wanted to review Ayanda's early files again, to understand her connection to Naledi more clearly. He pulled up the logbook from 4 years prior, back when Ayanda had first been brought in after her injury. Naledi had been one of the volunteers assigned to her recovery. Sifo remembered that part clearly. What he didn't remember was the handwritten note Naledi had added on the final day of Ayanda's release. "She has more heart than most people I've known. If she ever sees me again, she'll know I'm safe. I'll call her Injabulo." Sifo sat back, stunned. The lioness had a second name, a private one, a personal one, shared only between human and beast. That explained everything. Lwazi wasn't speaking Zulu. He was calling out to her. Ayanda, and somehow she had remembered. Sifo closed the logbook slowly, heart heavy. Whatever people might say, whatever scientists might argue, he now believed something unexplainable had taken place on that road, something that transcended instinct or memory. But there was no time to dwell. A call came in through the ranger station's main radio. One of the border patrol teams had discovered tire tracks not far from where Naledi's vehicle had crashed, not from her car, from a second vehicle. They appeared to follow a different route, then vanish near one of the rarely used service gates. "Could be a poacher's truck," the voice on the radio said. "Could be something else. Should we investigate?" Sifo's jaw clenched. "I'm on my way." He and a small unit left within minutes, driving out toward the coordinates. As they moved deeper into the reserve's outer boundary, a troubling thought formed in Sifo's mind. What if Naledi wasn't just running toward the reserve? What if she had been running from something? The tracks ended abruptly near a dense patch of thorn trees. One of the rangers found broken branches and disturbed grass just off the trail, signs someone had gone off-road, possibly on foot. They followed the path cautiously. 15 minutes in, they found something chilling. A makeshift camp. Hidden beneath the canopy of trees were a few scattered items, a rusted kettle, a tattered canvas blanket, and plastic wrappers. Someone had been living here recently, and not alone. Sifo picked up a half-empty baby bottle, still damp. Lwazi hadn't been alone for days. He had been here, which meant Naledi hadn't simply crashed while arriving. She had escaped. The questions piled up. Who else had been with them, and where were they now? Back at the station, Naledi's condition had improved enough to speak in full sentences. When Sifo returned, he sat beside her and asked the question carefully. "Naledi, was someone else with you before you arrived?" Her eyes immediately filled with dread. She looked away. "You need to tell me," he said softly. "We found the camp." She closed her eyes. "His name is Duma. We met 2 years ago, after I left the reserve. He was charming at first. Told me he wanted to live simply, off-grid. I thought he was different." Sifo's stomach turned. He'd heard this story before. "He isolated you." "Yes," she whispered. "When I found out I was pregnant, he told me the child belonged to the bush. That Lwazi should never know the world of cages, that the wild would raise him. He took us into the reserve through a broken fence near the northern fire zone. I didn't realize how deep we had gone until it was too late." "Did he hurt you?" She hesitated. "Not physically, not often, but he kept us there. No radio, no way out." Sifo leaned forward. "Where is he now?" "I don't know," Naledi said. "He left the night before I escaped, said he was going to track lions. I used that time to run. I waited until Lwazi was asleep. I drove through the dark until the crash." Sifo's breath caught. If Duma was still out there, injured, angry, and obsessed with the lions, then the situation wasn't over. It was just beginning. And Ayanda's pride might not be the only ones watching the roads tonight. The moment Sifo stepped out of the infirmary, the evening wind hit him like a warning. The sky was shifting, clouds rolling in fast from the west. A thunderstorm was forecast for later that night, and the air already smelled of electricity and dust. But the weather wasn't what unsettled him. It was the thought of a man like Duma, loose in the bush, potentially armed, possibly tracking the very lions that had just made global headlines. Because yes, the story had leaked. Despite Sifo and Coetzee's attempts to contain it, a junior staffer had posted a blurred photo online. A child standing among lions. The post had gone viral in less than 12 hours. International outlets were already calling the reserve's switchboard, demanding interviews, footage, access. But worse than the reporters were the opportunists. If Duma saw the post, he'd know. He'd know the boy had survived. He'd know Naledi was alive, and he'd know exactly where to find them. Sifo radioed the outer patrols, reinforcing orders. No one enters or leaves without clearance. Naledi and Loazi were moved to a secure staff cabin, away from the main clinic under quiet watch. The Pride had since retreated far into Sector 3, well outside tourist routes, likely sensing the disturbance in the air. Ayanda, in particular, had not been seen since the morning the boy was found. Still, Sifo couldn't shake the feeling that something was building. That night, as rain began to fall in short, hard bursts, Sifo checked in on Naledi. She was sitting by the cabin window, her arms wrapped tightly around Loazia's, who slept beside her. Her eyes were distant, haunted. "He'll come, won't he?" she asked softly. Sifo hesitated, then nodded. "He might." Naledi blinked hard, jaw clenched. "He used to talk about the lions like they were gods, pure, untouched. He said they would cleanse the world of weak men and take back what was theirs." Sifo felt a chill in his bones. "Has he ever hurt animals?" "Not at first," she said, "but then he started talking about tests, challenges. One night, he told me he wanted to see if a lioness would kill a child if left alone. He didn't mean Loazi, at least not that time, but I think he was fantasizing." Sifo stood, the urgency in him now a roar. "If he comes near this station, we won't let him anywhere close. You're safe now." But he didn't believe it, because Duma wasn't the kind of man to walk away. And deep inside the reserve, another drama was unfolding. In the early hours of the next morning, 2 rangers patrolling Sector 3 radioed in with a sighting. Ayanda had returned to the road, alone. She was pacing near the same stretch of dirt track where the child had been found, her posture agitated. No signs of injury, but her breathing was fast, her movements erratic. She kept sniffing the ground, moving in short bursts, as if looking for something. "She's not hunting," said the ranger on the line. "She's tracking." Sifo grabbed his jacket and left without a word. By the time he reached the spot, Ayanda had vanished again, but her paw prints were still fresh in the mud, overlapping with a second, smaller set of tracks. Human. They led into the bush, toward a narrow ravine known as Echo Hollow, a place where sound travels strangely, disorienting even for trained rangers. It was a dangerous place for any animal or person, especially in the rain. Sifo followed the trail alone, flashlight in hand, heart hammering. After 20 minutes of careful tracking, he found something chilling, a small leather pouch, soaked through, hanging from a tree branch. Inside were scraps of paper, drawings, notes, bits of fur. One piece read, in jagged writing, "They guard the boy. They choose blood over weakness." But blood remembers. Sifo's fingers tightened around the note. This wasn't random, it was ritual. He radioed in for backup, but the signal was weak. The rain had picked up, and thunder rumbled in the distance. Suddenly, a sound, a low growl. Not lion, human. Then the flash of a silhouette, just beyond the trees. Someone watching, someone waiting. Sifo raised his light, heart pounding. But there was no one there, only the echo of breath. And deep in the hollow, somewhere beyond his reach, a lion roared. The lion's roar echoed through Echo Hollow, bouncing off the ravine walls like a siren from the ancient world. Sifo froze, flashlight trembling slightly in his hand. It wasn't just the sound, it was where it had come from, too close and too deliberate, and it hadn't been followed by silence. It had been followed by laughter, low, human, and sickeningly calm. Sifo turned, sweeping his light across the underbrush. His fingers hovered near his holster, but he kept his weapon down. The rules were strict, fire only if attacked, but rules blurred when danger stalked both man and lion. He stepped forward, heart thudding. Crunch. He looked down, a footprint, bare, human, fresh. Duma was here, and he was watching. Sifo's radio crackled with static. Then, finally, a voice broke through. "Sifo, do you copy?" "Yes," he whispered. "I'm in Echo Hollow. I believe Duma is here. I've found evidence of ritual behavior, notes, objects, and signs he's following the lions. Do you need backup?" "I need silence," he said. "If he hears too much chatter, he'll vanish again." There was a pause. "Understood." We're tracking Ayanda's signal. Her GPS collar pinged 2 minutes ago. She's not far from you, less than half a kilometer. Sipho's throat tightened. Don't let anyone approach her. Not yet. The call ended. He pressed forward, boots squelching in the wet soil. The ravine narrowed, the trees leaning in tighter like conspirators. Above, the storm hadn't broken yet, but lightning occasionally illuminated the branches in jagged flashes. That's when he saw it. A fire, faint, hidden behind a rocky outcrop, and a figure crouched low beside it. Sipho moved silently, circling around to gain a better angle. From a rise above the clearing, he saw the man clearly now, Duma, lean, sun-browned, with long dreadlocks and sharp cheekbones. He sat with his back to the flames, muttering to himself, sharpening a stick with a long hunting knife. Beside him, splayed out on a tarp, were bones, not human, small antelope, maybe, but arranged in a circle, surrounding a crumpled photograph. Sipho focused. The picture showed Naledi, holding Luwazi as a baby. Duma stared at it, eyes distant. I told you, he muttered aloud. They would choose the wild. I told you they knew better than you, but you had to run. You ruined it. Sipho felt a surge of rage, but he kept still. Duma suddenly stood, turning his face toward the forest. They took the boy, but I will bring him back. Ayanda will understand me. She always has. Sipho slowly reached for his radio, keeping his eyes on Duma. Target located, he whispered. Echo hollow, he's alone. He's armed, possibly unstable, awaiting silent perimeter lock. Copy, came the response. Team en route. But before Sipho could respond, Duma lifted something from the ground. A GPS tracking tablet, the kind only reserve staff had access to. He'd stolen it from Naledi's kit before she escaped, and he was using it to follow Ayanda. Sipho's blood went cold. Duma looked up into the trees, then pointed straight toward the screen. There you are, he said to himself, moving alone. Coming to me. He packed his gear quickly, slinging the knife into his waistband and the tablet into a side pouch. With frightening calm, he began walking toward the location indicated on the screen, toward Ayanda, toward the lioness who had once trusted Naledi, and maybe now trusted her child. Sipho whispered again into the radio. He's moving, heading southeast, likely toward Ayanda's last ping. I'm following him on foot, quietly. Intercept before he makes contact. Understood. 5 minutes out. But 5 minutes might be too late. Duma moved like he belonged in the forest. Silent, efficient, feral. He muttered softly as he walked, reciting phrases Sipho couldn't make out. But one word came up again and again. In Jabulo, he wasn't chasing the lion. He was summoning her. As the path narrowed and the trees opened into a small basin, Sipho slowed. Because ahead, just barely visible in the moonlight, stood Ayanda. Her silhouette massive and still, golden fur catching the edge of silver light. She stood at the center of the clearing, ears forward, unafraid. And Duma. He was walking straight toward her, arms open, like he expected to be embraced. Ayanda stood motionless in the clearing, her amber eyes fixed on the man approaching her. She did not growl, did not back away. Her body was taut, alert, but not aggressive. The rain had finally stopped, and mist hovered low across the ground like smoke after a battle. The only sounds were Duma's boots on wet soil, and the steady drumbeat of Sipho's pulse in his ears as he watched, hidden among the brush. Duma slowed as he neared her, lowering his arms slightly, but keeping them open. Ayanda, he murmured, as if greeting an old friend. You remember me? Ayanda tilted her head, ears twitching. She sniffed the air, not moving a step. The distance between them was less than 15 feet now. You protected the boy, Duma continued. You saw it in him, your blood, your wilderness. He doesn't belong to her. He belongs here. Sipho's breath caught. This man had completely unraveled. He believed the lioness shared some mystic link with him, that she had chosen his vision over Naledi's. That somehow Ayanda had acted not out of loyalty to Naledi or instinct toward the child, but as a participant in his twisted ideology. And Ayanda, she just stood there, watching, unblinking, as if weighing the soul in front of her. Duma reached into his pouch and pulled out a scrap of fabric, a small torn piece of blue cotton, the sleeve from Loise's shirt. "I took this when I left," he said softly. "So you wouldn't forget." He held it out, offering it like a gift, stepping one pace closer. That's when Ayanda moved, not toward him, but around him. She walked in a slow, deliberate arc, circling him as she would an unfamiliar animal. Her steps were light but loaded with caution. Her eyes never left his body. Duma froze, but smiled. "She's acknowledging me," he whispered. Sifo couldn't wait any longer. He stepped out from the brush, weapon holstered, hands visible. "Duma," he said loudly. The man spun around, startled, but didn't draw his knife. "You're trespassing on protected land. Put down the weapon and the GPS unit. Step away from the lioness." Duma glanced back at Ayanda, who had stopped walking. Her eyes were now on Sifo. "She knows me," Duma said, voice rising. "You don't understand. She chose me." "No," Sifo said. "She tolerated you." "That's different." Duma's eyes narrowed. "You think you know her. I lived with her spirit long before you ever noticed." He took a step closer to Ayanda. Sifo's voice sharpened. "Stop." But Duma didn't stop. He turned again to the lioness and held up the GPS tracker. "I followed your path. I saw where you stopped, where you rested, where you waited." Ayanda's ears shifted slightly, tail flicking once. "Do you know what it means when a lion chooses to lie down with a child?" Duma asked, turning again toward Sifo. "It means she has accepted him as one of her own, not as prey, not even as human, as pride." Sifo didn't respond, because deep down, some part of him believed it too. But belief didn't mean surrender. "Put the tracker down," Sifo repeated, quieter now. Duma did not comply. Instead, he took a final step toward Ayanda and reached out to touch her. The lioness didn't move, not at first. But when his fingers were inches from her fur, she emitted a low, guttural sound, a vibration that carried through the air like a warning tremor before an earthquake. Duma hesitated, eyes wide now. He'd miscalculated. Ayanda took one step back, then released a deafening snarl. Duma stumbled. Sifo pulled his radio. "Do not fire. Hold all positions. Ayanda is reacting. Man is too close. We need a clean way out." But just then, another shape appeared at the edge of the trees. A second lioness, smaller, eyes locked on Duma, followed by a third and a fourth. Ayanda's pride had returned. They emerged from the mist like spirits, silent but overwhelming. Duma backed away, turning in slow circles, trying to keep each lion in view. Panic now crept into his voice. They know me," he stammered. "They know I brought him here." The lions fanned out, not charging, not growling, just enclosing. Duma's chest rose and fell in sharp jerks. He turned to Sifo, now desperate. "You need to stop them." "You walked into this," Sifo said calmly. "You don't understand them. You only used them." Duma looked for an exit, but the lions had made a new circle, not of protection, of judgment. And Ayanda was at the center, her eyes fixed on him, unblinking, unforgiving. Then, without a sound, she took a step forward, and Duma finally screamed. Duma's scream shattered the silence. The birds scattered from the treetops, and a low growl rumbled across the clearing like a subterranean warning. Ayanda stood her ground, unflinching. The other lionesses continued circling, tightening slowly, each step calculated, deliberate. Duma stumbled backward, slipping in the wet earth. His palms smearing mud across the photo still clutched in his fingers. "They're not going to kill me," he gasped. "They wouldn't. They remember." Sifo moved cautiously into the clearing, one hand on his radio, the other held out to keep Duma in his peripheral vision. "Duma, stop moving. Don't run." Duma's chest was heaving. "She trusted me. She followed my scent. I raised her. I was the one who taught Naledi how to handle her." "No," Sifo cut in firmly. "Naledi formed that bond, not you." Ayanda tolerated your presence because Naledi allowed it. You were a shadow, nothing more. Ayanda's ears twitched. Her eyes never left Duma. Another step forward. Now she was just 5 feet from him. Duma fell to his knees, holding out the muddy photo like an offering. Please, you know me. You know why I came. He belongs here. He belongs with you. For a moment, the forest froze. Even the other lions halted. Ayanda took one long breath, then lowered her head, slowly. The tension was unbearable. Sifo watched, every muscle locked in place. Ayanda extended her paw, not to strike, but to press down, firmly but carefully, on the scrap of fabric Duma had dropped earlier, the piece from Luazi's torn shirt. She lowered her body over it, shielding it with her chest. It was a gesture of protection. Possession. Duma watched in disbelief. She's keeping it. Why? And then the realization hit him. Ayanda wasn't recognizing him. She was recognizing the child. Sifo's voice was barely a whisper. She remembers who he belongs to. Duma's face twisted into something between rage and confusion. No, he was born here. He's part of this land, not some... A roar exploded from the lioness closest to his left flank. It wasn't Ayanda. It was one of the younger lionesses. She lunged forward, not to attack, but to warn. Her front paws slammed into the ground inches from Duma's side, dust and earth flying in all directions. He collapsed, curling into himself, hands over his head. I didn't mean harm, he shouted. I wanted to bring him back to where he belongs. Sifo moved in quickly. Stay down, he barked. He slowly stepped between Duma and the lionesses, raising both hands in a calming gesture. Ayanda stood and watched Sifo, her posture still alert but less tense now. She seemed to recognize him and, more importantly, to trust him. She let out a low huff of breath, a signal. The other lionesses hesitated, then began retreating, one by one, vanishing into the mist like they had come. Ayanda lingered. She looked at Duma once more, one long, silent look. Then, finally, she turned her back to him and disappeared into the trees. The moment she was gone, Duma broke. He collapsed completely, shoulders shaking, face pressed into the mud. I thought they would listen, he whispered. I thought I was chosen. Sifo knelt down beside him, not out of compassion, but because the time for a rest had come. You weren't chosen, he said coldly. You were obsessed. The backup team arrived moments later, rifles lowered but ready. Duma was handcuffed and lifted into the patrol truck, too exhausted to resist. His eyes stayed fixed on the forest the entire time, as if waiting for Ayanda to return and correct what he now saw as betrayal. But she didn't return. She didn't need to. Sifo watched the truck disappear down the path, then turned to face the direction the lions had gone. The forest was quiet now, still, but something had shifted. Not just in the pride, but in him. Back at the station, news had already spread. Naledi stood on the porch of the cabin, holding Luazi tightly in her arms. Sifo approached slowly. She looked up, reading the truth in his expression before he even spoke. You found him, didn't you? Sifo nodded. He's alive. We've got him. He won't come near you or your son again. Naledi's shoulders sagged in relief. Did Ayanda? She chose, Sifo said, and not him. Naledi clutched her son tighter. But as Sifo walked away, something still tugged at him. Because as the lions vanished into the brush, Ayanda had looked back once, not at Duma, not at the clearing, at Sifo. And in that look was something more. Not recognition, not warning, something that felt like a message. And Sifo couldn't shake the feeling that Ayanda wasn't done yet. The sun was low over the ridge when Naledi finally allowed herself to sit alone. Luazi was asleep inside, curled under 3 blankets, his breathing steady and safe. For the first time in days, she wasn't terrified he might disappear into the night. But safety didn't mean peace, not yet. Sifo stood near the fence, arms crossed, watching the tree line. Do you think she'll come back? Naledi asked softly. Sifo didn't turn. She already did. Naledi exhaled sharply through her nose. Not what I meant. Sifo stepped closer and leaned on the post beside her. I don't know, but lions don't forget, and neither do people. There was a long pause between them. Then Naledi turned to him, voice tighter now. Why didn't you tell me Duma was out? Why let me believe it was over? Sifo met her eyes. Because I thought I could stop him without dragging you back into it. I was wrong. You think, she said bitterly. He nodded. Naledi stood, the motion sharp. He took my child, he stalked me. He used the same lions I raised to get close to us. They didn't let him, Sifo said quietly. That matters. She blinked. Sifo continued, his voice more careful now. Ayanda didn't follow him. She followed you. And when she found your son, she made a decision. I watched her choose. Naledi looked away. I trained her to trust people, to rely on us. Maybe that was a mistake. Or maybe, Sifo countered, you taught her to tell the difference between a protector and a predator. Naledi didn't answer. Instead, she walked toward the edge of the porch and looked out at the golden horizon. The grass shifted like a restless ocean, wind brushing across the savanna in slow, rippling waves. Behind her, Sifo added, he's being transferred tomorrow, a psychiatric facility in Limpopo. Maximum security. He should never get out again, she muttered. He won't. Another silence settled between them. But this one was heavier, because the unspoken truth still hung in the air, something Naledi hadn't voiced, something she barely allowed herself to admit. Sifo saw it, and finally he asked, what is it? Naledi turned around slowly. When Ayanda took him, when she walked away with Luazi, I didn't run, I didn't scream. I froze. Anyone would have... No, she whispered. Not any mother, but me. I trusted her. Even in that moment of panic, I trusted the lioness more than my instincts. Sifo didn't reply, because he couldn't. Naledi stepped closer. Do you know what it means to watch your child be carried off by something you raised and not chase them? Sifo opened his mouth, then closed it again, because she wasn't looking for comfort. She was confronting her own guilt. I thought maybe I was broken, she said. Like I'd spent so many years with these animals, I forgot how to be human, forgot how to be a mother. You froze, Sifo said finally, his voice calm. But not from failure, from trust. Naledi shook her head. That's not good enough. Maybe not for you, he said, but for Luazi. It might have saved his life. He stepped beside her, now facing the savannah too. The first human Ayanda ever trusted was you. And when Duma tried to manipulate that trust, she saw through it. Naledi's voice cracked. I don't know who I am anymore. A mother, a conservationist, a failure at both. You're someone who let a lioness carry her child into the wild and still found a way to bring them both back. That silenced her. Not because it was a perfect answer, but because it was the first one that felt true. Behind them, Luazi stirred. Naledi turned instinctively, moving toward the door, but Sifo caught her wrist gently. She'll come back, he said. Naledi looked up. Ayanda, he added. She wasn't done with you. Naledi swallowed. And if she comes back, what then? I can't go back to how it was. I can't keep pretending nothing changed. Sifo nodded. Then maybe you don't. Maybe you do something new. She raised an eyebrow. Like what? He hesitated, then said, tell the story. Let people know what happened here. About Luazi, about Ayanda, about how this reserve is more than territory lines and fence posts. She considered that, then asked, and you? Sifo gave a small smile. I'll be here, watching the bush, listening for paw prints in the dirt. Naledi chuckled softly. You always did like the quiet ones. They stood together in silence again. But this time, there was something settling in the air, a sense of balance returning. Until, a low rustle behind the fence, both turned at once. In the dying light of the sun, two golden eyes stared back. For a moment, neither of them moved. Naledi stood frozen on the steps, her hand still halfway to the doorknob, eyes locked on the two golden orbs beyond the fence. Sifo's breath caught in his throat. Ayanda had returned, but this time, she wasn't alone. Behind her, emerging slowly from the tall grass, came two lionesses, smaller, younger, but unmistakably watchful. One moved like a shadow, the other paused every few steps, ears swiveling toward every sound. A trio, a formation, a message. Naledi stepped forward. "Ayanda," she murmured. The lioness blinked once. Then, in a gesture that was unmistakably intentional, she took 3 steps closer to the gate. The distance between them now was less than 10 meters. Close enough that Naledi could see the dark scar just below her eye, a mark she remembered from years earlier, after a territorial fight. "You've grown old," Naledi whispered with a sad smile, "but you're still the queen." Ayanda's head tilted slightly. The other 2 lionesses remained just behind her, their bodies tense but not aggressive. It was not a hunting posture. It was one of caution and invitation. Sifo lowered his voice. "She came to show you something." Naledi nodded, her chest tight. She stepped down from the porch and walked slowly toward the fence. With every step, memories flooded her, of nights spent tracking Ayanda's movements, of bottle feedings and stitched wounds, of the first time she ever placed a GPS collar on the lioness's neck, with shaking fingers and a silent prayer. When she reached the gate, she hesitated, then unlatched it. Sifo stiffened. "Naledi, I know what I'm doing." She pushed the gate open and walked into the dusk. Ayanda didn't move. Naledi stopped 3 meters away, lowering herself to her knees in the grass. "I didn't come for you," she whispered, "but you always come for me." The silence between them deepened. Ayanda took 1 step forward, then another, and then, without warning, she did something that Naledi hadn't seen since the lioness was barely 2 years old. She bowed her head. Not submissively, deliberately, like a gesture of respect. Then, with care, she turned and began walking away. The other lionesses followed. But after a few paces, Ayanda stopped and looked back. Her eyes met Naledi's. Then she glanced toward the edge of the cabin. Naledi turned instinctively, and there, standing in the doorway, rubbing sleep from his eyes, was Lwazi. He stepped outside groggily, blinking at the fading light. His mother held her breath. Ayanda watched him. Her ears flicked. Then she let out a deep, low vocalization, a soft moan-like sound, almost like a call, not a roar, not a threat. Something quieter, something older. Lwazi's eyes widened. He took 1 step off the porch, then another. Naledi reached for him but stopped herself. Ayanda watched him approach the gate. She didn't move. Lwazi paused at the fence, looking up at his mother, then out at the lioness. "What's she saying?" he asked softly. Naledi knelt beside him. "She's not saying anything." "Then why do I feel it?" Naledi's voice shook. "Because she remembers you." Ayanda slowly turned again, and this time she began to walk into the grass, leaving nothing behind except the mark she'd made on them both. Lwazi looked up at his mother. "Will she come back?" Naledi looked down at him, brushing his hair gently. "I think she already did." They stood there together, mother and child, watching the golden silhouette dissolve into the land like a memory. Sifo approached, slower now, voice hushed. "You two are part of her story, and she's part of yours." Naledi nodded. "But it's not over, is it?" "No," Sifo said. "Not until someone tells it." And with that, they all turned back toward the cabin. Inside, the fire was still crackling softly, casting warm shadows on the wooden walls. Lwazi curled up again on the couch, clutching the small carved lion Sifo had given him. Naledi stood by the window for a long time, watching the horizon. There was peace now, but not silence, because the land was still speaking, through every paw print, every gust of wind, every memory. And Naledi knew the climax was coming, and the world needed to listen. 3 days passed. The reserve was quiet, unnaturally so, as if the entire ecosystem was holding its breath in the wake of what had transpired. The other rangers moved with subdued steps. The radio static seemed softer, and even the animals kept to the shadows more than usual. Naledi hadn't gone back into the bush, not yet, but she kept the window open every night, and every morning she would walk to the edge of the reserve and stare into the horizon, where Ayanda had last disappeared. She didn't know what she was hoping for, not exactly, until the morning it happened. The sun had barely crested the hills when a low, trembling sound reached her ears. It was distant, like a rumble caught in the folds of mist. Naledi stopped dead. Then she ran, barefoot, hair undone, heart pounding. She sprinted past the patrol gate, past the grove of acacias, into the golden clearing where it had all begun. And there, standing tall and still in the heart of the land, was Ayanda. But she was not alone. Between her front paws, nestled against her body, was a cub. Naledi gasped. It wasn't Ayanda's. It was too small, too new, too human-shaped. She stepped closer slowly, breath shallow, and then she saw the truth. Wrapped in a weathered baby blanket, curled in deep sleep, was a baby girl, a human child, no older than a few weeks. Naledi's legs nearly gave out. She fell to her knees, eyes locked on the impossible scene before her. What? What is this? Ayanda didn't move. She simply looked at her. And Naledi felt the meaning, as if Ayanda had spoken it aloud. This child was left here. I protected her, like you once protected me. Tears spilled down Naledi's cheeks. Where did you find her? Ayanda remained still, but the implication was clear. Someone, another outsider, had abandoned this baby on the edge of the reserve. And somehow, Ayanda had found her before the wild did, and carried her here, to Naledi. Sifo arrived moments later, skidding to a stop behind her. What is it? He saw the cub, froze. Then his eyes widened at the bundle between Ayanda's paws. Is that... Naledi nodded. It's a baby. They approached together, cautiously. Ayanda stayed perfectly still, her eyes calm, not possessive, not territorial. She was waiting. Naledi reached out, arms trembling, and slowly lifted the baby from the grass. The child stirred but didn't cry. Her skin was warm, her breathing strong. Someone had cared for her. Until they didn't. Sifo's voice was raw. Why bring her here? Naledi stared down at the baby girl, then at Ayanda. And suddenly, she understood. Ayanda had brought her to the only place she knew as safe, to the only person she trusted with the most fragile of lives. To her, Naledi's voice broke. She's not just returning the past, she's creating a future. For the first time in hours, Ayanda moved. She stepped back, slow and graceful, her gaze never leaving Naledi's. Then she turned toward the rising sun and walked into it. No more hesitation, no more glances. Her duty was complete. Sifo knelt beside Naledi. We need to report this. She nodded, but she didn't move. She looked down at the infant, cradled against her chest, then whispered, She didn't come here for me. She came for her. He looked at her, unsure. What will you do? Naledi met his eyes. I'll raise her. You're serious? She chose me. Ayanda chose us. And I won't betray that trust. There was silence again. But this time, it wasn't heavy. It was full of something else. Something sacred. Something new. A few weeks later, the story spread across the region. A baby found at the edge of the wild, a lioness who guarded her, a woman who raised both lions and children as if there were no difference between the two, and a boy named Luazi who one night looked up at the stars and said to his new baby sister, she wasn't lost, she was brought here, because in a world that often forgot how to protect the innocent, sometimes it took a lion to remember. Years later, the story became legend. Tourists arrived asking about the lioness who saved a baby. Some didn't believe it. Others came hoping to catch a glimpse of the child, or of the lioness who had vanished into the grasslands like a phantom. But Naledi never told them more than they needed to know. Some stories, she believed, weren't meant to be consumed. They were meant to be remembered. Luazi was now 12. He had grown tall and quiet, with deep-set eyes that held the kind of wisdom you rarely saw in boys his age. He moved with the silence of the bush, and often spent hours sitting under the old baobab at the edge of the reserve, sketching lions from memory. His sister, whom Naledi had named Imani, which meant faith, was now 6. She was wild in the best ways, barefoot, curious, fearless. Her laughter could startle birds from the trees and make rangers stop mid-step just to smile. She'd been raised among rustling grasses, animal tracks, and firelight. Her first words weren't mama or baba, but Ayanda. Sometimes she would ask where the lioness had gone. Naledi never had an answer. She went home, she would say, where she belongs. But the truth was more complicated. Ayanda was never seen again, not by human eyes at least. No ranger spotted her after that final morning. No camera traps caught her passing. No carcasses were found either. It was as if, once her task was complete, she simply faded into the very spirit of the land itself. Naledi didn't try to explain it. Some things were too sacred for explanation. She had spent years documenting her story, not in interviews or news articles, but in notebooks, in voice memos, in long nights at her desk with tears on the keyboard. She recorded every detail she could recall, not to prove anything, but so the memory would not be lost. And one day, she placed the completed manuscript in a sealed wooden box, wrapped it in cloth, and handed it to Lwazi. "This is for her," she said. "When she's ready." He nodded solemnly. "I'll wait." And he would, because he understood something now, more deeply than most adults ever would, that some stories don't belong to the world until they're fully grown. Naledi sometimes woke at night, wondering if Ayanda had died alone, if she had felt afraid, but something always stopped her from spiraling too far. A single memory, replayed like a dream. The look in Ayanda's eyes as she laid the baby at her feet. It wasn't fear, it wasn't pain, it was trust, it was farewell. On the anniversary of that day, every year, Naledi would walk alone to the old clearing. She'd bring nothing but silence and maybe a cup of rooibos tea, and she'd sit on the ground where the grass still grew differently, taller somehow, as if nourished by something unseen. And she would whisper, not prayers, not regrets, just gratitude. Thank you for Lwazi. Thank you for Imani. Thank you for returning when the world turned away. Thank you for knowing that love isn't bound by species or blood. That sometimes the fiercest protectors wear claws instead of uniforms, that the wild isn't always cruel. Sometimes it's exactly where the most vulnerable are safest, and as she stood to leave, she always felt it. Not a sound, not a breeze, but something real, like an unseen presence walking beside her, like the echo of paw prints in the dust, like a promise, quietly kept. And maybe that's the lesson here. That in a world that so often fails its children, its animals, its people, there are still moments of unspeakable grace, moments where nature steps in, not as a force of chaos, but as a guardian of balance. Maybe the wild doesn't just take. Maybe, sometimes, it gives back, in its own way, in its own time. And if we're willing to listen, really listen, we might just hear it, in the rustle of tall grass, in the breath of a sleeping child, in the footsteps that vanish without a sound. Ayanda is gone, but what she left behind still walks among us. If this story moved you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it, because somewhere out there, another child might be waiting, another protector might be watching, and another miracle might be quietly unfolding just beyond the edge of what we think we know. Subscribe to our channel for more true, emotional stories like this one. And if you're still wondering how this tale ends, you already know it ends here with you, still thinking about a lioness and what she chose to protect.